Vanilla or something?
Seeing it's 6:01, I would like to call the February 15th, 2023 regular meeting of the Kenai City Council to order and ask that you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everybody. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Askin?
Here.
Councilmember Winger?
Present.
Vice Mayor Baisden?
Here.
Student Representative Thibodeau?
I am here.
Mayor Gabriel?
Here.
Councilmember Doffett?
Here.
Councilmember Sonart is joining our meeting through Zoom right as we speak. And Councilmember Naxted?
I'm here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. First up, we have agenda approval, and Council would like to address your attention to a laydown you should have in front of you. Action, add to item D9, substitute. And this is requested by the city clerk. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Naxted.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I move for approval of the agenda with the added item D9, the substitute, requesting unanimous consent.
Second.
Is there any objection to unanimous consent? Seeing none, the agenda is approved. Next up, we have the consent agenda. Councilmember Naxted.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I move for approval of the consent agenda and request unanimous consent.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public, or, sorry, is there anybody from the body that would like to amend the consent agenda at this time? Seeing and hearing none, I'd ask the clerk to please read the consent agenda into the record.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Approval of the regular meeting minutes of February 1st, 2023. New business, action approval, bills to be ratified, brought to you by the administration. Action approval of the first extension to the agreement with Redline Sports for management services at the Kenai Multipurpose Facility, brought to you by the administration. Ordinance number 3336, 2023, accepting and appropriating an American Rescue Plan Act grant passed through the State of Alaska Department of Health and Social Services for Kenai Senior Center expenditures in support of its response to COVID-19 public health emergency, brought to you by the administration. Public hearing on March 1st, 2023, and ordinance number 3337, 2023, accepting and appropriating an increase from the Kenai Peninsula Borough for the Senior Citizens Program grant, brought to you by the administration. Public hearing on March 1st, 2023, and that is your consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to any item that's on the consent agenda, which was just read in the record? Nobody online?
No hands are raised.
Seeing and hearing none, unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. That brings us to scheduled public comments. And this evening we have several. The first up will be Kenai Permanent Fund Annual Review 2022 Financial Performance, Financial Projections, and Recommended 2023 Asset Allocations for the City's Permanent Fund. This will be presented by Brandy Nicolai and Bill Learman from the Alaska Permanent Capital Management. And I believe Brandy's online, and we've got Bill in chambers here. You have the floor.
Thank you. On the first slide, we've been managing this account since 2008. And one of the things I was talking to one of the council members in before And the kind of the powerfulness of a permanent fund such as yours is there's been approximately $22 million in contributions to this portfolio since inception. There's been $15.2 million withdrawals. So we think about a net of 6.7 million. And today, or at the end of the year, December 31st, the current market value is 30.5 million. We ran the numbers since February 15th or 14th. The portfolio has returned 5% year to date. And now, as of yesterday, the portfolio is sitting at 32.1 million. What that all means is that the annual return on your guys' portfolio is about approximately 7%. Over the annualized rate since 2008. And your current strategic allocation moving forward is about 54% in risk assets. We think of risk assets as being high yield bonds, stocks, both U.S. and international. Risk controlled assets. We think about that as fixed income, investment grade fixed income and cash, and then alternatives. About 17% of your portfolio is sitting in real estate, infrastructure, and things of that nature. And Brandy will kind of get into that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandy to kind of walk you through a strategic review that we do with you guys annual. Kind of moves into portfolio objectives and expectations, and then we'll kind of dive into the policy and withdrawals schedules for the two funds that are in this, the airport land sales and the general land sale fund. And then if we have time at the end, after performance, move into market reviews. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brandy.
Okay, perfect. I just want to do a quick check here to make sure that you can hear me okay. Please stop me if you can't. I'm going to start by just talking about our forward-looking return projections over the next 10-year horizon. And I think the key takeaway here is in bold at the bottom of this screen. Basically, our 10-year inflation expectations has moved up since we spoke last year, but so has the portfolio's long-term expected return. And the amount that the portfolio's long-term expected return has increased has sufficiently offset our increase in inflation expectations. So given that overall assessment, basically we think that the overall allocation that we have today is still suitable going forward into the near future to achieve the city's goals and objectives for the permanent fund. If you advance to the next slide, I'll just go over at a high level what our long-term return projections are for the portfolio. So at the top here, we have just the overall goals that we have for the permanent funds as currently outlined in code. And as Bill was mentioning earlier, overall, the long term has been quite successful. The withdrawals have averaged about 1.1 million per year since inception, since 2009. So about 15.2 million has been distributed from the permanent fund. If you look at the table down below, you can see what our long-term return projections are. I'll focus your attention where it says long-term return growth. You can see that number is 6.6%. So that's an average 10-year return projection. Of course, we know we have exposure to risk, so markets will move up and down. We'll have years that are above the 6.6% return projection, and we'll have years below that. If you look at the annual return line where it says the range, negative 13.7 to 27.8, that's where we think the portfolio will be 95% of the time. So last year, our long-term return projection was 6.2%, so you could see the portfolio's long-term return projection has edged up. And if we look at our inflation expectations, they're currently 2.6% over the next 10-year horizon. So that sufficiently leaves net earnings of about 4%, which is what we need in order to have distributions. So overall, I think the portfolio is well positioned to meet the goals over the long term. If you advance to the next page, I'll just show you really quickly, we did a wealth simulation on where we anticipate the two permanent funds to be at the end of a 10-year horizon. So we started with the two portfolio values that you see in the first bullet point, 26.1 million for the airport land sales fund and 3.2 million for the general land sales fund, and we applied their respective distribution policies. And so you can see in the table down below, we have projected distributions for both of the accounts from 2023 onward. I'll make some more comments related to those distribution expectations in the coming pages, but those are our base case estimates going forward for the next 10 years. If you look at the graphic on the right-hand side, the black line indicates kind of our base case expectations. So for the Airport Land Sales Fund, we think at the end of 10 years after distributions, the portfolio is expected to be about $34 million. And for the General Land Sales Fund, it's $4.9 million. The other numbers that you see there are just probabilities of other potential outcomes, but we tend to focus kind of on where half the simulations come out, and that's the 50th percentile there. If you advance to the next page, I'll just start by making some comments as it relates to the distribution policy for the Airport Land Sales Fund. You can see we just summarized the code here in the first bullet point, which indicates that for this particular permanent fund, we have distributions that are either at 3.8% or 4.2%, depending upon where the portfolio is at relative to its inflation-adjusted balance. So you can see in the second bullet point that in 2022, the portfolio is down 13.6%, and inflation was up 6.5%. So that's about a 20% movement in just 1 year, given the overall market conditions were very difficult and the inflation backdrop was also high. So because of that shift, this overall distribution this year will be based on the 3.8% rate because the portfolio market value is currently below the inflation-adjusted principal balance. I want to make two important comments as it relates to the return last year, negative 13.6%. One is that if we look at the global stock market for 2022, global stocks were down about 18%. And if we look at the bond market, just the broad U.S. bond market was down about 13%. So we have a portfolio that is, has risky assets and is meant to produce long-term growth, and it performed in line with the broader bond market. And so I think the preparation that we did last year in terms of adding additional asset classes that act differently than stocks and bonds certainly helped weather the market conditions that we experienced last year. And then if you advance, this graphic here that we're showing you is just the array of potential outcomes for distributions for the Airport Land Sales Fund. The black line that you see in the middle is our base case estimates we just reviewed on the well simulation page. But I wanted to display kind of other potential outcomes because as we move out of difficult market conditions, usually we have some period of above average returns. So I just wanted to illustrate here that there are kind of different values based upon, what path the market takes from here. But certainly, I think for the foreseeable future, just given where the market or where the portfolio is at, we'll probably be distributing at a 3.8% level. Later in the 10-year projection time horizon, there is some probability that there will be distributions at the higher level of 4.2%. And then I'll finish this section by making a couple comments as it relates to the spending policy for the General Land Sales Permanent Fund. Again, the first bullet point just indicating what the code states for distributions. And this policy is a bit different. It's the lesser of cumulative earnings at the calendar year end, or 4%. So cumulative earnings is defined as the market value at the year end minus the inflation-adjusted balance. And of course, because the inflation-adjusted balance is, the portfolio is below the inflation-adjusted balance, then there's not a distribution for this particular permanent fund according to code. So there is a negative earnings reserve of about $120,000. We do think, based upon our forward-looking projections, there's about a 49% chance that there'll be a distribution next year, and that progressively gets better as we move through the 10-year outlook. So if you advance to the next page, I'll just summarize what our projections are for distributions for this account. Again, we think there's about a 49% chance that there'll be a distribution next year, meaning the portfolio value exceeds the inflation-adjusted balance. And that improves, we move through the 10-year horizon to about 74%. So we think in the next 10 years, on average, the withdrawals will be about 146,000 from this permanent fund, and we'll end up with the earnings reserve around 542,000. So we're just we're working and thinking about what the future looks like after the difficult year where we had both negative returns in stocks and bonds and high inflation.
And before we move
So
on,
I'm going to transition a bit here to just talk about the portfolio's actual returns through December year end. If you advance to the next slide, we can see this blue area chart, which is just the market value of the permanent funds through time since inception. The market value at the end of December was $30.5 million. So the bar charts that you see displayed below are actual calendar year returns that we've experienced through time. And if we averaged all of those out, the since inception return is 6.96%. And if you advance to the next page, you can see here where the portfolio is at as of the end of December relative to its long-term strategic weight. So that long-term strategic weight that you see in the table is the asset mix that we adopted last year that we think has a good probability of meeting the long-term return goals for the permanent funds. And then you can see where it says over or underweight. That's where the portfolio is at the end of December 2022 relative to that strategic weight. So you can see, for example, within U.S. fixed income, the long-term strategic weighted target is 26%, and we were just about 0.7% below that at the end of the year. So what we do is we think about near-term market conditions, and we utilize the ranges that are there allowable by code to allow APCM to be able to adjust the portfolio modestly based upon near-term market conditions. We just spoke a lot about long-term market outlooks, but we also want to be a bit responsive to near-term conditions as well. So this is where the portfolio is at. I think notably the alternative beta that we added last year was a 10% target. We were overweight about 1.4% at the end of the year. That asset class in particular, I think, helped cushion some of the downside exposure in the stock and bond market, and also helped us outperform our overall benchmark, which I'll talk about on the next page. So here you can see the orange bar chart, which is the actual portfolio, and the blue bar chart is that strategic benchmark that we just reviewed on the previous page. You can see the calendar year 2022, the portfolio is down 13.6, the benchmark was down 13.9. Again, for the broader context, global stocks were down 18% and bonds were down 13%. You can see that last calendar year, of course, we had a strong year, above average returns coming out of the COVID crisis. If we look at since inception, we're at the 696 versus the benchmark of 705.
Take a pause real quick, ask if you guys have, the council or mayor have any questions regarding the distribution or the earnings reserve or anything to that nature in our first section.
Vice Mayor Basin.
So thank you, Mayor. So I guess my question is dealing with the withdrawal rate between 3.8 and 4.2%. When do we go below, when or should we look at going below 3.8%? Do we have something within the guidelines that takes that if the portfolio isn't performing properly for the withdrawal rate? We set the 3.8% between we set that rate, right, for the withdrawal. So even in today's environment, the 3.8 seems probably a little bit high. If this was my personal retirement account, my financial advisor would probably be telling me go down to 2 or 3%. Do we have something like that in place dealing in this type of environment?
I can take that question if it's okay, Bill. I just want to explain that first of all, if we looked at a long-term historical sustainable withdrawal rate based upon, an allocation similar to the cities, then a 4% withdrawal rate over long-term history is very sustainable. So I think that what we do in terms of thinking about whether or not we should change that spending rate, really has to do with the overall long-term portfolio's net earnings expectations. And so because we think on average the portfolio will return 6.6% over the next 10 years, and inflation is at 2.6%, we think that you can withdraw the 3.8 or 4.2% based upon any given year's subsequent results without impairing the overall principal and inflation protection of the fund. So if we change the allocation or your risk tolerance changes, and we can't meet that overall 4% net earnings, then we would have to look at spending less. But I think that we've maintained a similar risk profile since inception, and at this particular risk profile, I think that the 3.8 is still sustainable, and so is the 4.2.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none?
Brandy, come, and we'll just kind of finish up with our market reviews from APCM's perspective.
Okay, I'll just make a couple high-level comments as it relates to the near-term market conditions. Here I just want to point out that this line where it says APCM 2023 views, that should be a live link for you. So if you have this electronically, you should be able to click that. That would bring you to about a short 8-minute video where we go over our 2023 market outlook. But let me summarize in just a couple of pages here some high-level comments as it relates to the 2023 outlook. If you advance to the next page, we'll just say that our overall theme here really is that we're moving from an inflationary period to a slow growth or even a recessionary period. We can see already global estimates for economic growth coming down. We're certainly already seeing signs that the economy is slowing down. I think in order for the markets to have a more sustainable recovery from this point, you need to see three major peaks materialize: peak inflation, peak rates, and peak valuations. And so as we kind of moved into 2023, we anticipated that markets will still be a bit volatile as we look for those overall signs of peak inflation, rates, and valuations. So I do think that the path for the economy is going, and the financial markets is going to depend a lot upon what the overall inflation and economic growth picture turns out to be. And so we might have to be a bit more nimble as it relates to how we're going to position the portfolio as we get more information. And so if you advance to the next page, I'll just say that currently we note that in regards to signs of peak inflation, we do see inflation rolling over. And the kind of key area that's keeping it above the comfort level of policymakers is that we still have excess demand. And here, particularly in the United States, and of course we still have geopolitical tensions. And those two things are contributing to higher inflation, higher above the 2% target. And we are seeing signs that we are finding peak rates because economic growth is slowing and inflation is coming down a bit, which suggests we're approaching towards the end of this rate hiking cycle. And importantly, I think when we look back historically, when the U.S. economy went through the last inflationary period in the late 70s and early 80s, the overall equity markets began to turn and have a more sustainable recovery once interest rates peaked. So we have to be a bit mindful of that because it's a bit different than what we're used to. We're used to seeing kind of the stock market begin a recovery once the Federal Reserve has begun cutting interest rates. So this environment could be a bit different just given the inflationary dynamics. And then when we think about peak valuations, I think that two important points here. One is that we look at the fixed income markets, and they are they're very attractive given the change in interest rates. So we started the year in the broad U.S. bond market with interest rates just over 1%, and we ended up at 4.5%. That was a very painful move in terms of the change of price. But when we look at potential returns going forward, we think we have adequate yield to offset any further increases in interest rates if we see that occur. But we also think that the bond market can produce a decent return should the economy fall into a recession. So if we think about the economy falling into recession, interest rates fall about 1%, the U.S. bond side of the portfolio could return about 10%. So a much different dynamic than what we experienced last year. And when we look at the equity side, we think, of course, equity valuations ended the year, of course, much lower than they started because of the change in price. And I do think that kind of going forward, the corporate earnings are going to be impacted by the slower economic growth. But once we kind of have a good handle upon what corporate earnings will look like here going forward in the near term, I think the equity markets can find a better footing for a more sustainable rally going forward. So if you advance to the next page, I'll just say, as we transition from this inflationary environment to a slow growth or even recessionary environment, there's kind of three different scenarios that we have and that we're monitoring and thinking about how we might position the city's portfolio in light of how these things unfold. The first scenario, of course, would be the most difficult. It would occur if inflation stayed much higher for longer and it forced central banks to increase interest rates more. That would be more difficult because we'd still see the continuation of negative returns from the bond and stock markets. But ultimately, we would probably hit a recessionary time and interest rates would decline and bonds would actually help the portfolio. It would just be more painful in the near term as equity and bond markets continue to be negative. In the second scenario, would be a less challenging route, and we would just have a shallow recession, and central banks could stay on course, and this overall environment would basically provide a floor for the stock and bond market more quickly, and lower interest rates would help both the stock and bond market. And the third scenario, I think, has a lower probability, but it just would be the more ideal route where we don't have any recession at all. The policymakers have done everything precisely correctly, and we have no recession at all. So I do think that we're positioned kind of for the slower growth scenario too. If you advance to my final slide, I'll just say that we went into the year positioned for this slower growth. We have our risk control bucket close to target in each of those asset classes, but we are overweight TIPS and underweight cash because we think the markets have priced in a bit lower inflation than where it will actually be. Within our risky asset bucket, these are all of our global stocks. We're on target, but we added some positions in companies that have higher free cash flows. We expect earnings to actually come in a bit lower, and we're looking to be tilted towards companies that have a bit higher free cash flow in that kind of slower earnings environment. And then within the alternative asset classes, we are on target, except for we do have alternative beta still positioned conservatively to kind of offset any movements off to the negative side within bonds and stocks. And so overall, that positioning has worked well so far year to date. We'll make our adjustments kind of as we see the path of growth and inflation and begin to unfold. So that concludes our prepared remarks, but we can certainly take some time for questions.
Questions from council? Vice Mayor Baisden.
Thank you, Mayor. I can't remember, is the fund actively managed, or is it based on a computer program whenever you're moving in and out of assets to keep it balanced? I can't remember if we've asked that question before.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say that it's actively managed because APCM does have the discretion to move away from the strategic targets based upon near-term market conditions. I'll preface that by saying, though, that we were very mindful of how much we move away from that strategic weight because we don't want one of our near-term market expectations to not work out into our favor and impair the ability for the city to meet its long-term objectives. So we do have some active management within a risk control framework.
Further questions? I guess I have one. So I keep hearing of this sort of new investor philosophy regarding investments based on ESG. Is there any influence of of that ESG policy with any of our investments?
No, I think that there's no explicit investment decisions based upon an ESG framework in any of the funds that we hold. The closest that we would have would be within alternative data. BlackRock tends to have a focus on ESG, but the fund we utilize doesn't make explicit decisions based upon that.
But Brandy, the policy that governs this portfolio does not have ESG constraints or anything to that nature, I think is,
No.
there's nothing in policy that restricts ESG or motions us one way or the other.
Right, okay, very good, thank you. Further questions? Mr. Eubank?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Brandy or Bill, because I don't know that I specifically heard it, and I think I could have missed it too. I just want to confirm for council that our asset allocation that is being proposed for 2023 is the exact same as 2022. There's no change in the proposed asset allocation or any of the benchmarks that we measure the portfolio's returns against, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you for the clarification. I was wondering that.
Further questions? Not seeing or hearing none. And as usual, thank you for your time to come down and deliver us this information and keep us in the loop of where we're going and what we're doing with our funds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, Council.
Thank you.
Next up, we have under scheduled public comments, we have Project Homeless Connect 2023 report from Jody Stewart, Project Homeless Connect Publicity Chair.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Mayor Gabriel. Thank you, council members, for having us come speak to you today. If there are questions that I cannot answer at the end, Leslie is here to bail me out. So I very much appreciate that she is here today as well. So today's presentation is a little bit different than last year's. But for those that are new to the council, I wanted to make sure to kind of hit the high points of what Project Homeless Connect is. We are a program, it's a one-time per year where people have access to all services for individuals experiencing homelessness or houselessness and or needing support in some way. Our organizational structure is very confusing to some. Hopefully after this lovely diagram, it will clear it up as much as mud. So we have the Kenai Peninsula Continuum of Care. That is the overarching organization that allows HUD funding to come into our communities. The Continuum of Care is mandated in order to get HUD funding. And so we work to coordinate housing. Many of the members of the coordinating Continuum of Care are also members of the Kenai Peninsula Homelessness Coalition and are also many of the members that help plan Project Homeless Connect. So that's why you see the same faces and hear the same story from a lot of people. So there is the creation of the Kenai Peninsula Homelessness Coalition, where they're looking strictly at housing, providing cold weather shelter, shelters in general, trying to determine long-term transitional shelters, housing, getting an individual into permanent housing. And then Project Homeless Connect, that piece is that one day attracting everybody that we can that are having issues into one event to receive services. In addition to Project Homeless Connect being that one-day service, it is also tied to our point-in-time count. Our point-in-time count is also a HUD function. So last year we talked about COVID and how it has impacted our event. I like to consider we're post-pandemic, like we're on the other side, we're moving on. So you can see that this is a significant increase over last year. Last year was a rough year for getting numbers. Actually there at the event, I'm not exactly sure what was so different other than maybe still getting over a lot of the fear and trepidation of getting together in large groups. So you can see that there's definitely an increase in participants and numbers in the household that were represented. Here you can see that, and I like to point this out, are members with disabilities. This population is unfortunately a large part of our participants. And this is something that's important for you guys to know, that what population we serve during this event, these are our most vulnerable. These are the people that are going to struggle the most because they have more than just one issue in front of them. I always like to bring your guys' attention to what's not habitable. We have people that are living on the streets, in the woods, in tents if they're lucky. We have people living in sheds. We have people living in places that have parts of them burned down. We have people living in things that shouldn't be lived in. So although they themselves may consider themselves housed, it's not habitable. And so there's this discrepancy also in regards to our participants to the event, that they may tell the intake workers, yeah, I've got a house, but really it's not meant for human habitation. And so, we try to gather and, gain as much insight into their housing situation as possible to adequately reflect what it is. But I can tell you that number is not accurate at all. And if you want to, thank you. So everybody wants to know kind of the reasons why people are struggling. Every year, almost extensively, it's everything. It's not just the loss of a job. It's not just because of domestic violence. And those are things that we have money that go towards. We have a lot of funding going towards individuals that are escaping domestic violence. We have a lot of funding going to those people needing additional employment support. But what we find is that this population is really all over the board with their reasonings for being homeless. Did I lose it? So we always ask our folks, were you treated with respect, and were your services that you received on that day helpful? And thankfully, we are almost always at 100% in regards to that. That blue bar is the one I'm going to bring your attention to. So a little over 60% said that this was their first event, meaning that they have never received services from Project Homeless Connect before. So 60% were all new faces. And I can tell you, when I was there for the brief time I was, people I did not necessarily recognize from other events, although I know that they are vulnerable folks that I have seen in our communities. So I briefly mentioned the HUD component, that's the funding. We ask, where did you spend the night on the day before? So we had the event on the 31st. We asked them where they stayed the night on the 30th. That number helps us to get more funding. So I pulled some data out of the report that you guys were provided. This is just the kind of snapshot of what we're looking at. We're pretty much on par for where we have been in past years pre-pandemic as well. This one's a little bit different. Our first time episode of homelessness was a little bit higher than pre-pandemic, but kind of on par throughout the pandemic. And then our 4 or more times is also about on par. So that really hasn't changed over time. Obviously, folks are saying if there's a cold weather shelter, we'll be there. And the reality is that's what this community for the entire Central Peninsula really needs. A cold weather shelter where the temperatures drop, there's a place for people to go, stay the night, not be able to freeze. The primary needs that they reported, transportation, food, and then their secondary needs, we're talking about, fuel, gas, propane. We saw a lot more of that this year. Some of those types of things that the price of all of it has gone up, and so it's impacted, and people are having to make really tough choices. This year, lots of highlights. So we had some animals get some supplies. This event represented 164 community members. Like I said, it's not a complete view of everyone that has issues with housing, but it is a good snapshot of the people willing to come out and ask for help. I thought it would be interesting to know kind of what the percentages of the folks that are really the employability age. So that was 19% of the participants. Everybody seems to always want to know how many of our veterans are having issues with housing. So that statistic is never a good one. That is really high. 16% of our participants were veterans. Other than that, for you guys, for Kenai, 39% had reported that their last permanent address was here in Kenai. So of the folks that showed up, 39% call Kenai home, at least their last home. Last year, I decided to add this information in regards to kind of how housing looks across the state. So this is the information that is a statewide study. This is updated as of 2022. What it means is that you have to make $24.32 an hour in order to afford a one-bedroom rental. That is the requirement to be able to maintain that. It goes through and does some additional data. Pretty much it's 1.8 jobs that a person will have to have in order to have a one-bedroom rental here in the state of Alaska. Obviously, we know that things get skewed. You can see that on the lower left-hand side, those are our more rural areas, and those numbers go up pretty substantially. And then this one's super hard to read, and I apologize for that. But here on the Kenai Peninsula, our average wage for a one-bedroom apartment is $20.62, which is double minimum wage. So definitely substantial. If you were to go towards what the annual income would look like, you'd have to earn at least $42,000 and change in order to afford that rental. Pretty sad statistics, but Project Homeless Connect is a fantastic event. We have so many people that come out and participate and donate. It is amazing and wonderful. And the good news is everything that is done in donations, and thank you very much for the city's kind consideration of us for one of your grants. We greatly appreciate it. But those donations also help post Project Homeless Connect to assist folks. So if we have extra clothing, extra food, extra hygiene items, all that stuff kind of helps out throughout the year. So there's 2 additional pieces of information that I've got. I was so close on time. So 13 additional people were counted during the point in time count that were outside of our event. And then just for your information, right now, Kenai Peninsula housing prices are up 7.2% over last year, with our median price for an actual home price of about $300,000. So when you keep those wages in context, I wanted to paint that picture as well. So thank you so much for letting me speak today.
Thank you, Jody. Would you mind standing or setting for questions? I say, Councilmember Dothan.
I just had a quick question. One, where was the event held? I guess
Soldotna Sports Complex.
Soldotna Sports Complex. Okay. And then I saw Bishop's Attic is on here. Salvation Army participated in that too, or no?
Not this year.
All right. I was just curious. Thanks.
Councilmember Winger.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Leslie, for being here as well. I always look forward to your presentation. I guess out of all of this, the one that really hits the hardest is the 16% veterans and the 39% of people that claim Kenai was their last home. And then your slide that the participants were largely disabled. Disabled being a variety of things. Is that physically disabled, mental, substance, I mean, really what classifies them as disabled?
Thank you for the question. So we're talking about chronic health conditions, developmental disabilities, drug use and alcohol use disorder, HIV/AIDS, mental health disorder, physical disability. So pretty much it's a wide umbrella for disabilities. So all of those would apply.
Okay, thank you. And then what percentage of this were children? I was kind of looking through the statistics. I'm sure you have that kind of broke out in here a little bit more.
Not really. So the event itself, we have done this for a number of years where we have tried to get, the school district to bring the kiddos out, but it means taking them out of school, which isn't really great. So we've had to make some tough decisions on how best to make that work. And so we partner with the students in transition. You know, they reach out to their folks and say, is there something that you need? We facilitate if they need to come to an event or if they need services that the students in transition team can't manage, that we work with them to do that. So we focus on keeping our kiddos in school so they do not represent the participants of that event. That being said, they are part of that whole 196 of family members potentially. So you could have folks represented that are under the age of 18 and going to school.
So students in transition was one of my next questions for you, so thank you. And then what type of role are you guys using working in partnership with the homeless shelter in Nikiski?
All of that is a great transition. Leslie, do you want to talk about our lovely shelter in Nikiski?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to answer questions about the shelter. I can tell you that we do work very closely we are a part of the Homelessness Coalition and the Continuum of Care.
Oops, Leslie, can I have you come up here? We got a microphone here and we got to record everything, so if maybe you could introduce yourself and then start. This is part of the process. Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm Leslie Rohr, Executive Director of Love Inc. of the Kenai Peninsula, and we are the operating agency for the Nikiski Shelter of Hope. I can tell you, last year at this time, we were just getting started with the shelter. Now we have a full year under our belt. We've had 92 adults come through, representing 72 households, 30 children. The oldest of those children was 16, and then there was a 13-year-old. All the rest are below 10. 18 pets, 19 counting the bunny, 6,678 bed nights as of last night, and that translates into about 18,000 meals. So, yeah, it's a pretty big undertaking, and we rarely have any beds empty.
And if somebody wanted to help out either programs, how would they get in contact, and what type of help would you be looking for from the community members or individually from us?
Right. So I can tell you that the Nikiski Shelter of Hope is funded totally by donations at this point. Costs about $30,000 a month to operate. So because we are required to have 24/7 awake staff, so that personnel is a big chunk of our budget. So financial assistance is always welcome, but there are other things, daily consumables, paper products, and hygiene products. Those are things that we provide for our residents. When they come in, they usually have nothing, or what they do have probably needs to go in the dumpster. So it's really important for us to provide hygiene and clothing. We try not to keep a big supply of clothing on hand. Right now, one of the things that we're really struggling with is food. The food bank, I don't know if you've been to the food bank lately, but their shelves are nearly bare. And what they are getting from the Food Bank of Alaska has decreased. So they were one of our suppliers of food. The other way so our individual clients may have food stamps, but if you've listened to the news at all and know that food stamp reauthorization and new food stamp applications are so far backlogged that people have not had food stamps since some as far back as August. So food insecurity is a big issue. So we try to make sure that we have plenty of food on hand at the shelter.
And then to answer the second part of your question for the Project Homeless Connect, obviously the event is done, so we're not necessarily taking donations right now, but now's a great time to start planning for what organizations may want to do. We have lots of folks that begin their knitting cycles for hats and socks and gloves, so that's always a way to give back. We meet quarterly once the event is done with the continuum of care, so that's kind of how we start getting folks involved. If you're interested in that and would like more information, please feel free to contact me. I'll make sure to get you on the email invite and get you plugged in there, and ensure that as we move forward, continuing to plan in the future years, you guys are all in the know.
So as far as the shelter goes, contact for that would be through Love Inc. and our K Beach office.
Councilmember next, or did you have a follow-up?
I was going to follow up.
Okay, follow up, Councilmember.
I just wanted to say thank you for that information and the breakdown. And you said Love Inc. is the correct contact. Would that be for both, or would we, for Homeless Coalition, that be a separate contact? In theory?
Either one of us. We'll get you connected.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay. And then my one last question is because you said that there was a need for hygiene and paper products. Do you guys have, I know this sounds silly, but do you have an Amazon wish list that you put out publicly where people could directly donate through that?
Yeah, we did have it. It got taken down. We are in the process of redoing the wish list, but there will also be one on our Facebook page as well.
Thank you so much for the information. Thanks for everything you do, ladies.
Councilmember Nexton.
So for clarity, if I wanted to donate something like food, I have to go to Love Inc., contact somebody and take it somewhere?
Yes.
And I mean, I know where your facility is. It'd be easy just to take a box, but that's not what you want.
Well, no, actually, if you wanted to take a box of food to the shelter out in Nikiski, that would be absolutely fine.
Okay, but that would be easy. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and we would greatly appreciate that.
Further questions? Councilmember Dawson.
I've always wondered with the shelter, where did the clientele, how do you guys get the clientele referred to you, or do they go through a vetting process? There's like a waiting list, or how does that work exactly to get people into that facility?
All of the above. There is a vetting process, there is a waiting list, only because we have so many people who are needing shelter, and we try to prioritize families with children. People with disabilities that put them at greater risk are higher on the priority list. So we try to make sure that those that are the most vulnerable are housed first. That vetting is done through the Love Inc. intake office on K Beach. And referrals come from all over the peninsula. They've had, they come from the hospital and Children's Services, Department of Corrections. So we get referrals from everybody.
Thank you. I just was curious. Thanks.
And then just to follow up on that, to give context, there are some barrier crimes as well that if a person has that on their record, that would not allow them access to the shelter. So that's still a barrier that a cold weather shelter may be able to open up for those folks that have those barrier crimes. So folks specifically that are sex offenders, always difficult, and two, those with an arson conviction automatically have the most difficult aspects in trying to find housing.
Further questions? Councilmember Nexton.
Yeah, more of a statement. I did get a tour of your facility before it was purchased, went through the transition, and it's a very, very nice building inside, and it was all prepared. I mean, there were sheets and linens and the whole shooting match. I was very impressed. From the outside of the building, I didn't know what to expect because it'd been there, and then when I went inside, something else. And so I think that's really great what you guys are doing.
Great. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Sonart, do you have any questions?
We are not hearing you, Councilmember Sonart. You're unmuted. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Always appreciate you coming by and giving us a wrap-up to your event and keeping us informed of those issues here, not only on the Kenai, within Kenai, but surrounding too. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We'll take a 5-minute at ease.
I'm doing other things.
Back on the record, council, we're now to unscheduled public comments. Is there anybody from the general public who'd like to address the council at this time on any item that is not on the agenda or consent agenda? Anybody online?
There are no hands raised.
Okay, very good. With that, we'll move to public hearings. Item D1, ordinance number 335-2023, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations in the airport fund fiscal year 2023 budget for utility costs associated with the Alaska Regional Fire Training Center. Pleasure, council.
The other cord?
Did you say something, Councilmember Sonart?
Councilmember Sonart, can you hear us? She's unmuted.
We can hear background noises, but we cannot hear your voice.
Councilmember Sonart? I guess we're going. Can you text her? I think she's unmuted or something. Yeah. Pleasure, council. Councilor next then.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I move to enact ordinance 3335-2023.
I'll second it.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to ordinance number 335-2023?
There are no hands raised.
Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Mr. Eubank, can you give us a little overview here?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. If council will recall, since 2008, the city had an agreement with Beacon Occupational Health and Safety as a facility management agreement over at the Alaska Regional Fire Training Center. Under that agreement, Beacon was responsible for the majority of utilities of that facility while they had the management agreement. That management agreement ceased in December of this year. And since then, the city is now responsible for the majority of the utilities in that building. Part of those utility costs are going to be offset by rent being paid by Beacon for space inside that building. They no longer have exclusive use of that building. This is providing supplemental funding for the airport's budget to pay those utility costs because they were unbudgeted when we adopted the budget. Those costs are estimated to be almost $71,000 for 6 months. We're expecting about almost $33,000 in revenue for rent from Beacon in that time, and the rest is going to come out of airport reserves. So that's kind of where we are over at the Regional Fire Training Center.
Further comments, deliberations from council. Councilmember Dothan.
Have we had any interest or in the rentals for facilities over there, or anything in the future possibility would help with offset the costs for facility rentals at this point?
Mr. Eubank.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Dothett. What is on the horizon is if we have been, and I was going to report on this in my city manager's report, but we've been working in cooperation with State of Alaska DOT, also with the fire chief from the Anchorage International Airport on ARF training over there. That's the primary focus of a lot of that facility and some of the props. That training is going to take place in April of this year. We're still working through exactly how that's going to be structured, but there will be additional revenue that comes into the facility during that time for that training. Likely the state is going to hire a contractor to provide the training, and we're just going to have a daily rate to utilize our facility over there, which will provide additional revenue. I just don't know what that revenue is at this time. And we're continuing to look for other opportunities to bring revenue into that facility and, honestly, a long-term operating plan for the facility. We'd like to get into another similar agreement like we had with Beacon if there's another provider or training out there that would be interested.
And just I don't know if there's, I'm sure they're thinking about it, but trying to advertise that space out there, I just haven't seen or heard anything about advertising it, but I know we have those facilities for rent. Might be something the airport looks into putting an ad out somewhere or some kind of advertisement pushing that. Might be a good idea, but I haven't seen anything yet, and I just thought it might be a good idea we start pushing that a little bit. But no, I'm glad to hear we have some rent coming in. Hopefully we help offset that.
Councilman Winger.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Mr. Eubank, are we working with forestry or anything to see if they could do training opportunities, run that? I know we've had Red Cross in that facility in the past. Are we working with any of those entities to maybe get a lease and rent from them?
Mr. Eubank.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Winger. You know, we're open again to any and all. I know we've had active conversations with our own fire department and the avenues that they have. As far as Red Cross and things like that, most of those space that we've provided there in the past have been for nominal or no charge. So I do believe the Red Cross is still located upstairs or has an office upstairs in the facility. But, you know, with the absence of an agreement or an operator in there like a beacon, I think the city is going to be forced to look for other opportunities to generate revenue to offset those costs of that facility. It's 160 to 200,000 a year in utilities at that facility. It's not inexpensive to run. So,
Thank you.
Further questions, comments, deliberation? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Winger?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Baisden?
Yes.
Student Representative Thibodeau?
Yeah.
Mayor Gabriel?
Yes.
Councilmember Dothett?
Yeah.
Councilmember Sonart?
Yes.
Councilmember Naxted?
Yes.
Councilmember Askin?
Yes.
You have 7 yes votes. Ordinance 3335, 2023 is enacted.
Thank you. Next up, we have item D2, resolution number 2023-06, authorizing the city manager to accept a donation on behalf of the city of property described as Lot 4, Block 8 of the original township in Kenai, town site of Kenai, Alaska, from the trust agreement of Thelma M. Bagoy for a public purpose and determining that the public interest will not be served by an appraisal. Pleasure, council. Councilor Naxted.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt Resolution 2023-06, request unanimous consent.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2023-06? Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Comments, deliberation from council. Councilman Winger.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Maybe Mr. Eubank can kind of give us a 30,000 square foot or level view of kind of what we're going to use this for and what this means with our land use.
Mr. Eubank.
thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Winger. I can tell you where the property is located. I will defer to Linda if you get into too many specifics, but this property is in Old Town. It's as you drop down the hill where Meeks Trail is, it's one of the properties that's right there on the side of that slope, and Meeks Trail kind of intersects around the top of it. We have other property that's been donated to us in that same area. We have no plans for development of this. It really would just be as a protection area or because of that trail being adjacent to it. You know, to utilize it more as a park or open space, and no foreseeable development of it. But it's nice to get it to help buffer that. It's really undevelopable land where it's located there on the side of that hill and with the wetlands there below it. But it's nice to get it in city possession to kind of preserve it.
Thank you, Mr. Eubank. I was trying to picture kind of the area and so that gives me a more clarification. Thank you.
I thought I saw a picture. Was
Yeah,
it?
there's a picture in
Yeah,
there.
there was a.
There's a
I think
picture.
there is a
It just-
picture in
Since you
the.
said slope, it struck me where it was at.
Yeah, there is an overview there, but yeah, it's sort of unbuildable, I believe, isn't it, Mr. Eubank? Okay, further comments, deliberation, Councilman Naxted.
Just a question on how the donation came about. Was that something that they initiated themselves?
Mr. Eubank.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Naxted. This is where I will defer to Linda.
Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel and Councilmember Naxted. So this actually was a letter that was received by the city back in 2021. As I am new, I'm going through everything, and I discovered this letter. And as a follow-through, I reached out to the daughter of the trustee, and she said she was still interested. And the reason why they were interested in donating it was recognizing that it was undevelopable, so they wanted to go ahead and donate to the city a little bit over 2 years ago. So now we're finally moving forward with it.
Councilmember Winger.
I just want to say thank you, Linda, for everything and your thoroughness and following through and stuff. So thank you for what you're doing in our planning and zoning department. Thank you.
Further comments, deliberation? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll. Or unanimous consent was requested. Is there any rejection? Seeing no objection, resolution number 2023-06 is adopted. That brings us to resolution number 2023-07, designating the investment and allocation plan for the city's permanent funds and establishing appropriate benchmarks to measure performance for calendar year 2023. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Askin.
I move we adopt resolution 2023-07 and ask for unanimous consent.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution? Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2023-07?
No hands raised.
Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Councilmember, or Vice Mayor Basin.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. So, yeah, I enjoy the presentation whenever they come down here. Very thorough in what they do. I think we're lucky to have this fund. I do worry because of the environment we're in. Long term, I think we're going to be okay. I think short term, just like every other municipality who has funds that are invested, is probably going to come up short with what they're typically used to. But I think this is a solid investment strategy.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2023-07 is adopted. Next, we have resolution number 2023-08, repealing City Council adopted policy 2018-02, procedures for including contingency funding and contracts. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Naxton.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt resolution 2023-08.
I'll second.
Request unanimous consent.
Thank you. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2023-08?
There are no hands raised.
Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Comments from council? Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2023-08 is adopted. That brings us to item D5, resolution number 2023-09, renumbering Kenai City Council travel policy 2014-02 to policy number 20.200. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Naxton.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt resolution 2023-09. Request unanimous consent.
I'll second.
Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2023-09? Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Comments, deliberation from council. Seeing and hearing none, resolution number 2023-09 is adopted. Next up, resolution number 2023-10, renumbering the Kenai City Council Public Recognition Policy number 2014-01 to policy number 20.210. Pleasure, Council. Councilmember Askin.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I move to adopt resolution 2023-10. Request unanimous consent.
I'll second that.
Thank you. You get the next one, Victoria.
On, I believe this is where I'd move to make an amendment to that, or no?
Yeah, just, I'd open it for public comment.
Okay.
So is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2023-10?
There are no hands raised.
Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Councilmember Dothan.
I'd like to move to make an amendment to the City of Kenai Public Recognition Policy, paragraph 1. I'd like to move to, by amending the amount to not exceed from 150, which it currently is, to the 200. The reason for this is just to help compensate for inflation. I believe it was brought up during our work session. It was last looked at in 2016. That's not necessarily when the fund was looked at, but that was when this ordinance was last looked at, our policy. And with inflation, just from the inflation calculator I put it into, $150 in 2016 is now the same buying power as $186 today. So by going to just a maximum of 200, I think that gives us a little bit of cushion for the next inflation over the next couple of years to maintain our buying power of a maximum of $200 with that.
Request unanimous consent.
Thank you. Is there any objection to unanimous consent for the amendment? Seeing none, we now have resolution number 2023-10 as amended before us. Further discussion? Is unanimous consent requested? Is there any objection to unanimous consent? Seeing none, resolution number 2023-10 is adopted. Next up, resolution number 2023-11, amending city council agenda and packet preparation, distribution, and publication policy number 2019-01, and renumbering to policy number 20.000. Pleasure, council. Councilman Raskin.
I move we adopt resolution number 2023-11 and ask for unanimous consent.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2023-11?
There are no hands raised.
Seeing none, we'll bring it back to council. Deliberation from council. Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2023-11 is adopted. Next up, we have resolution number 2023-12, amending the city council procedures for recording city council meetings and work sessions, policy number 2017-03, and renumbering to policy number 20.010. Pleasure, council. Councilor Nexton.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt resolution 2023-12, request unanimous consent.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2?
second.
Yeah, I'm getting way ahead of myself, thank you. Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2023-12?
There are no hands raised.
No hands? Back to council. Deliberation. Unanimous consent was requested. Is there an objection? Seeing no objection, resolution number 2023-12 is adopted. Next up, we have item D9, resolution number 2023-13, repealing the unnumbered city council electronic devices during, is that supposed to be repealing and renumber?
Repealing the unnumbered.
The unnumbered, okay, city council electronic device during meetings of the council policy and adopting city council policy number 20.110, use of electronic devices during meetings. Pleasure, council. Councilor Nexton.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt resolution 2023-13.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2023-13?
There are no hands raised.
So no one bring it back to council, and I'll remind council that there was a substitute, proposed substitute that was handed us prior to the meeting. Councilmember Nexton.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I move to amend the policy as attached to resolution number 2023-13 by substitute city council policy number 20.110, use of electronic devices during meetings.
Second.
Request unanimous consent.
Thank you. Discussion on the amendment? Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, we now have resolution number 2023-13 substitute before us. Discussion on the substitute? Unanimous consent was requested? No? There was? Okay, very good. Is there any objection to unanimous consent? Seeing none, resolution number 2023-13 is adopted. Moving on to item D10, we have resolution number 2023-14, amending the city council mobile device use and management policy number 2017-01 and renumbering to policy number 20.120. Pleasure, council. Councilor Nexton.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to adopt resolution 2023-14 and request unanimous consent.
Second.
Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to speak to resolution number 2023-14?
There are no hands raised.
Seeing and hearing none, we'll bring it back to council. Discussion. Councilmember Nexon.
Yeah, just a comment, and just the history of this was that when we funded to have these devices provided to council members, that the primary purpose of doing that was to reduce the cost of paper and printing and binding and mailing and all of that with the clerk's office. And so I would encourage the council members that have a device to use it and discourage the use of paper when possible. Naturally, sometimes we need to do that, and that's understood. But that's all I have.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, resolution number 2023-14 is adopted. Item D11, resolution number 2023-15, amending the city council selecting and appointing a qualified person or person to fill vacancies on the city council, policy number 2021-01, and renumbering and renaming to city council policy number 20.220, filling council vacancies by appointment. Councilmember Askin.
I move we adopt resolution 2023-15 and ask for unanimous consent.
Councilmember Winger.
I have a motion to postpone.
I think we need a second.
Second first.
Yeah, so we need a second.
I'll second.
Very good, thank you. Is there anybody from the general public that would like to speak to resolution number 2023-15?
There are no hands raised.
Seeing and hearing none, bring it back to council. Councilmember Winger.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. I move to postpone resolution number 2023-15 to the March 15th, 2023 meeting. This will allow the city clerk to gather more information and propose additional changes to clarify the process when there are more than 2 candidates for appointment.
Second.
Request unanimous consent.
Unanimous consent was requested for postponement of this ordinance to the March, or resolution rather, 2023-15 to the March 15th meeting. Unanimous consent was requested. Is there any objection? Seeing none, this resolution number 2023-15 will appear on our March 15th agenda. Moving on to H1, Council on Aging, Commission Committee Reports, Council on Aging.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Council on Aging canceled its February meeting because most of us will be at the workshop next Thursday.
Thank you, Councilmember Sonart. Next up, we have Airport Commission.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. The Airport Commission met on February 9th in the conference room at the airport for a work session. And there they discussed air service development at the airport, along with the float plane lake. They've got some people interested in leasing some spots over there. And they have a strip of land set up where they can start executing those leases. The largest discussion was held regarding passenger facility charges. The FAA governs airports are allowed to charge for every passenger who lands at our airport. And it usually is collected in a ticket fee up to $4.50 per passenger, and it's they pay for 2 legs of their flight. So for their trip. So if they flew from here to Anchorage and Anchorage to Seattle, they would get charged for both of those legs. And it's highly regulated. They have to have a project in place before they can start collecting. And so there was considerable discussion about identifying projects that they might institute this collection. And that's it.
Councilmember Nexon.
And how is that, just a question, that sounds an awful lot like a passenger fee that's already charged, for each individual. So this is in addition to that, and I'm not sure what they would be paying for.
No, this is the same thing, but they aren't collecting it right now because they don't have an identified project. But they can, if they come up with an identified project and the FAA approves it, then they can start collecting it.
Thank you, Councilmember Askin. Airport, I'm sorry, Harbor Commission.
We had kind of a meeting. We didn't have anything on the agenda, so it turned into more of a informal work session. And those will continue until we actually have something on our agenda. So right now we'll have informal work sessions until we have an actual agenda item to discuss. And at this time, I believe the only real thing possibly coming up was some possible work on a couple of the cement pads down there on the boat ramp, but nothing's been set in stone on when that's going to be brought in. And so if anybody has anything for the Harbor Commission to discuss or ideas they'd like to have presented to them, we are more than welcome to put them on our agenda, and we'll take it up when we have them. So nothing really exciting to report at that time.
Thank you. Parks and Recreation Commission.
Thank you, Mayor. No report. Their next meeting is March 2nd.
Thank you. Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you, Mayor. Planning and zoning's been busy for some reason. February 8th, they had a work session, and they're getting great comments for the ordinance that we have pending. That's going to come to us next month, dealing with maximum number of chicken hens that can be proposed to have on residential property. They do have their meeting on February 22nd. I won't be here for that meeting, so I'll need somebody to stand in for me. I'll be in Sitka.
Any volunteers? For the 22nd?
I would, but I don't know that it'd be appropriate.
Okay. Sounds like we have several volunteers there.
Well, I know that Alex is a sponsor, so it probably wouldn't be proper for him to sit in for that.
I don't think it would be appropriate probably for me to be there.
I'm a co-sponsor.
As the co-sponsor, would it be proper that way she could sit in too? Are you good with that?
I'm good. I haven't spoke to it or anything publicly. As liaison,
The
we
clerk
don't
weigh
speak.
in here.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
It would probably, I guess, from the optic standpoint, it would probably be better to not have the other sponsor there. Are you
I
going to be
mean,
there?
I would be willing to do it, but not for this meeting.
So you're
I
going,
just probably
you're going to
be
be
steer clear
will you
for
be
it.
at the meeting to speak to your ordinance?
I don't know. I haven't been asked. I think they've asked me. I don't know. Am I supposed to be? I guess that'd be a good question. I don't know.
Thank you, through the mayor. As the sponsor, yes, so if you're not going to be, the co-sponsor could be the person
Yeah.
in attendance. And the way the draft policy is written, if the sponsor is the liaison, they should leave the dais through that process in the meeting. So it would be better to have a different liaison for that meeting than a sponsor of an ordinance that's going to be before the body.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
That's where I was going. So I would suggest that we have either Councilmember Naxted or Councilmember Askin cover the liaison duties, and then Councilmember Winger would be available as a sponsor of the ordinance. Okay, very good. So I'll let you work out with your other.
Thank you. I was going to say you work it out because I'm not going to be there.
Oh, okay.
No,
So-
I think we have it worked out.
Councilmember,
I think ladies first. so-
Councilmember Askin? Okay, so we'll plug Councilmember Askin in for the liaison, okay? Good. Next up, we have Beautification Committee.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Beautification Committee will be meeting in chambers here on February 21st at 6 p.m. for a work session.
Thank you. On the report of the mayor, I did go to the Chamber of Commerce joint luncheon last Wednesday for the candidate forum for the interim borough mayor. It was interesting listening to the various candidates at that time, and I think we had the election last night, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Machicki is in the lead right now for canvassing, so stay tuned for that. I did attend Paul Ostrander's retirement reception here last Friday and was able to present him with our council gift, which I think he appreciated. And for those of you that don't know what it was, does everybody know what it was? It was basically the components for a kegerator. So if you're in your retirement, brewing beer is kind of a fun thing to do. So you seem to appreciate that. And there's a little backstory. I went to a gathering at his house last summer, and he had to borrow one from Kyle Cornelius, and it didn't work at that. So hopefully he'll be able to make good use of that. And then earlier today, I was invited to speak at, the Chamber hosts a job shadow event every year. And what that entails is that all the juniors from the Kenai Central High School have a chance to pair up with the various community business members and shadow them. It's not just business, but there's also the hospital and I think the schools were involved, but they get to shadow the various people at those jobs to figure out if it's something they would like to do or be exposed to, you know, the working world. I know Silas was there last year, and I missed you this year, but yeah, it's a good way to break the ice. But so anyway, they asked me to show up and impart some knowledge on them. So I always enjoy doing that, and I really enjoyed that event. So with that, I'll go to administration reports. First up, City Manager, Mr. Eubank.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. Just a few things to report on. I wanted to let council know we have scheduled the 2023 State of the City address. It'll be on April 5th at the Chamber Lunch. Mayor Gabriel and I will be presenting the State of the City. Talk about a little bit about bluff erosion. I did get to review a document on the latest cost estimate. It had a number of questions that the Corps was responding to, so it's not finalized yet. But everything is the numbers are currently in line with other projections, so I don't see any big surprise there, but that document is not finalized yet. It should be relatively soon. Also along bluff erosion. Yep. Okay.
Mr. Eubank.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. I was talking about bluff erosion. About a month ago, there were 4 parcels that the city was still in need of either easements on or to gain ownership for that project. That number right now is down to 2. Hopefully is going to be down to 1 before the end of next week, and we have a plan forward to work on the final one. I can say that that's a cooperative effort. Ms. Mitchell and Mr. Bloom have been helping me a lot with getting those final easements and parcels. We had the Corps actually approve some easement language on one of the parcels. We got word of that last Friday, so we'll be getting that easement soon. So things are progressing. I do see the schedule slipping a little bit because we still haven't seen our participation agreement with the Corps, but they still are confident we're due for another update meeting here real soon. But last I knew, they still are optimistic that project can go to bid this year and get moving. give council a little bit of heads up on recruitments. We are doing some reference checks right now in connection with the HR position. I'm extremely cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to make an offer potentially this week. Finance director position, we reopened that. It's been open for 17 days and we have 0 applicants at this time. It was scheduled to close last Friday. It's been extended. I will tell council we are in the process of getting quotations to look for some assistance in that recruitment. Lack of better terms, a headhunter type firm to help us market that position. It's not an inexpensive process. It's probably $8,000 to $10,000 to employ one of these firms to help us with that position. But I think it's one we've got to keep pressing hard to try to fill and find a good candidate for as well. So our recruitment struggles, they're real. I did meet with the Boys and Girls Club. The mayor and vice mayor were there. They kind of gave a preliminary layout of where their design is over there for their campus on South Spruce. Still very much in the design stage, but it was nice to see a little bit of an update from them. I did talk earlier about what's happening at the Alaska Regional Fire Training Center. Like I said, I think most importantly is that we are very much engaged with the state and other partners to make sure there's uninterrupted ARF, aircraft rescue firefighting training there that happens this summer. It's very important to aviation in Alaska, and we recognize that. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that comes off. You know, just to highlight again the climate we're dealing with positions. This week alone, we've had 2 resignations here at the city. One is an administrative position and one is a police officer. So, you know, the number of recruitments that we're doing is up significantly, and they're becoming more and more challenging as we go through them. I just want to emphasize this because I think, you know, this is quickly becoming a real high priority for the administration to try to stay in front of this and make sure we still have the ability to recruit and retain quality folks. I did testify last week before Senate Labor and Commerce on this and provide them a perspective from the city of Kenai and what we're seeing in the labor markets. So I do want to stress the city is doing well. It's just very challenging, and we have a lot of assets that smaller communities in the state don't have. So we have the updates for CAPSIS, which is the legislative system where you input for capital type grants. That closed today, actually. That we updated our inputs into CAPSIS using the city's adopted capital plan. Thank you guys for that. So that's been done. My phone has already started ringing and emails have started coming in regarding summer ice at the Kenai Multi-Purpose Facility. I think the city was pretty clear in our actions last year that the damage to that facility is being caused by having ice that time of year. I will tell you, I'm actively working with the city of Soldotna. I hate just telling people no. I think it's our jobs to try to find solutions. I've been working, we've had meetings with Soldotna folks, and we're trying to find a path forward so that these organizations have some availability of ice. But at this time, I'm still committed to that, trying not to be in Kenai. It's causing too much damage to that facility, and I don't know that it's in our best long-term outlook. Last thing I'll report is sales tax and property tax. This is it's almost like Christmas this time of year. We get this data on a daily basis. I received both sales tax and property tax information yesterday. For the fourth quarter of 2022, our sales tax was up 3.98% year over year for the fourth quarter. We ended up 2022 4.45% over 2021 on an annual basis. I will also tell you our online sales tax is trending up right now. I estimate it's going to come in about $220,000 over what we budgeted. In total, right now, the estimates that I'm seeing based upon 2 quarters of data and online sales tax data is I would project our sales tax revenue will probably exceed our 2023 budgeted amount by about $400,000. So these are optimistic things, but you know, a 4.45% annual growth, but inflation was 8%. So we're still not trending above inflation, but we're at least positive. On the real property side, a little disappointing to me. We're looking at, I estimate now it'll be about 2.25% increase on our real property values, taxable real property values compared to a year ago, and which equates to about roughly $100,000 in revenue growth we could potentially see in 2024. Again, that's disappointing considering what the real estate market that I saw here over the last couple of years. But we don't have personal property, and we haven't seen the state assessors haven't let out information on oil and gas assets yet. So some of the revenue picture is starting to trickle in and become a little bit clearer. We are seeing growth. It's modest, and it's certainly not pacing with inflation right now. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions of the city manager, Councilmember Nexton.
Thank you, Mayor. Terry, thank you for the report. It was very complete. I do have a question on the bluff erosion. The consultant is, I think the last plans we had was 65, 90% or 95% is due at some point. I was just wondering where that is.
Mr. Eubank.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Nexted. I believe it's in the end of March, April timeframe. We're supposed to get 95% drawings, and to my knowledge, our consultant is still on pace. They were waiting for some borings. We just completed some borings along the bluff's edge last week. What they were honestly looking for is residual oil, residual diesel that may have settled along that area. There's no sign of it. It's just a precaution. They have to take this into account for what they may have to do with that soil if they excavate it out. So we had to do some borings, and those borings were completed last week. So that design is I believe, still on track.
Further questions, city manager, Councilmember Dothett.
I know the borough had talked about it, but it seems like we're leaving money on the table with our current assessments. Are they still working on redoing their assessment models, or is that still on their agenda for trying to update that, or have you heard anything?
Mr. Eubank.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Dothett. I think the borough actively goes through that process every year. You know, it's difficult when you're trying to estimate the value of, I don't know, 50,000 plus parcels using a single model. So it's not a perfect science, but I know they work at it every year. So I think.
Vice Mayor Basin.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. So the problem is with real property is until we fix it to where you actually have to turn in your sale and it's reported, you know, they're doing their best when it comes to estimating with the model that they have. I know they've just recently, I think over the last few years, they've greatly upgraded their GIS product so they can see when changes take place and that type of stuff. I mean, my house is asset, I think, at a pretty fair value, but it's hard for them to get to all of them and do them fairly, I think, until we start reporting sales. We're going to continue to have this problem.
Further questions of the city manager? Seeing none, we'll go to the city attorney, Mr. Bloom.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel, members of council. I don't have anything to report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of the city attorney? Seeing none, we'll go to city clerk, Ms. Sainer.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Just looking forward to seeing as many of your faces as I can next Thursday for the training session.
Next up, we have any questions of Ms. Sainer? Sorry. Seeing none, we'll go to additional public comments. Is there anybody from the general public that'd like to address the council at this time?
There are no hands raised.
Seeing none, we'll go to council comments. Councilmember Sonart.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Don't have any comments at this time. I thank everybody for the good discussions tonight. Satellite connections can be spotty, but I hung in there and kept calling back. That's it. Thank you. We'll see you later.
Thank you, Councilmember Sonart. Councilmember Douthat.
A couple kind of, I guess, more chamber-related things, and they involve the city too. One of the kind of the exciting things I think that's coming on, that we had a good meeting with the Kenaitze and Salamantoff Indian tribes over there, involving the museum and a bunch of artifacts that were kind of discovered, so to speak, when we started cleaning out a bunch of rooms and stuff over storage facilities, and kind of this the collection that they've had over there. Some things are labeled, some aren't, maybe improper labeled items. So with finding all these items, we decided to have a group meeting and start a kind of a work session with them over there. We met with a whole gamut, about 6 or 7 different representatives from the tribes, all of the different expertise, from language experts to, archaeologists and all kinds of interesting things. And they kind of started digging through what the collection is over there. They're pretty excited about it. We're kind of going to go with the game plan of just letting them have at it. They're going to meet about every 2 weeks, it sounds like, with a group of people. They're going to bring in some elders next time to help identify some of the items over there, try to get proper names and labeling. Just in the little time we were there in the museum itself, they were able to identify a few things that were mislabeled, or writings, the lettering wasn't quite right. So they're going to help us redo the signage. And the big thing is try to get a bunch more things on display over there. So that's a pretty positive thing. I think we're hoping with the timeline of possibly next or this spring maybe to have some kind of a completely redone museum with a whole bunch of new exhibits is the hope. At least change it up out there and maybe do like a soft like reopening type of a thing, just to exhibit some of these new things that haven't been on display in years. So I know they're excited about it, and we learned a lot, and so I'm hoping to continue to meet up with them occasionally and kind of see what they found. There were some pretty interesting artifacts that we had no idea what they really were, and so I think that's exciting for the city and be able to work with the Kenaitze in that facet. They were pretty excited that the city had these great things, and a lot of them didn't even know they existed over there, and they drive by it every day. And so when I told them to come on and check it out, and then they started it was like kids in a candy store, man. They were so excited to be able to stuff that I would have looked at and not had a clue that it was so much interesting history. So that's going to be a neat thing. The chamber ED position and recruitment over there, it had a pretty good stall for a long period of time. We were getting ready to close it and kind of just deal with the few applications we did have. And then right there this weekend, we got, I'd say, 3 really good qualified applicants all of a sudden. So we will be, I'm on the hiring committee for that. We're hoping to meet up on Thursday, pick out 3 or 4 of our top applicants and set up interviews hopefully for the upcoming week. So I'm really hoping ideally by the end of this month maybe to make an offer. So we'll see how it goes with our timeline, but I'm pretty excited that we actually have some good qualified applicants put their names in the hat. So that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Student Representative Thibodeau.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Glad to be back. Sorry for my extended leave. Got a lot on the to-do list, but baseball practices have started up. They're not mandatory. They're just coaches coming in at around 3:30 and asking people to come. It looks like we have a good amount of people, maybe a team and a half. Unfortunately, one of our star players, Gabriel Smith, unfortunately broke his back and was almost paralyzed, which does suck. He's doing much better now. He's walking. He is at all of the basketball games and the practices, so that's good. Speaking of basketball, we are having, our basketball team is doing very well. I know that much. We, in fact, have basketball games this Friday I believe they are at 5 is the girls' varsity game, and then 6:30 is the boys' varsity game. And I will be there as a part of the pep band. We will be playing in the stands. It's going to be an amazing time. As the mayor so previously stated with the job shadow, it was fantastic not having the juniors there. I think the perfect day is no juniors, sophomores, or freshmen, and I think that would be just fantastic. Friday as well is going to be the homegoing dance. It is a Sadie Hawkins Western themed, and so that's going to be fun, I hope. It's a dance, so whatever. Honor Choir as well. A couple of my friends told me about how Kenai itself did in Honor Choir. I don't know exactly where they went, but I know that more than 10 people. Like, they had a lot of the students from our choir program were extremely talented and lucky enough to get in Honor Choir, and we did amazingly there. And last thing is esports. I know it's relatively new to everybody, but esports is doing fantastic. We just had 3 games today. We won all of them, so that was good. I'm in the team, actually. We were thinking of getting another team up with the help of Mr. Duhit here. And so, yeah, that's all I have to report.
Thank you. Councilmember Askin.
Great discussion today in the work sessions, and I really appreciated the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ware.
Thank you, Mayor Gabriel. Welcome back, Silas. I've missed your reports. I just want to go off of a little of what Silas was talking about. I know I've talked about this before, but we have some amazing student athletes in our area. I've got athletes in both competition swimming and wrestling. Looking through a lot like our voter rolls that aren't scrubbed enough. They don't scrub necessarily from these entities like USA Wrestling or USA Swimming. But their rankings, and it's amazing when you look at rankings of athletes in our area, we have a ridiculous amount of local athletes that rank in the top 100 in our state. So we turn out amazing athletes in volleyball, basketball, hockey, football, wrestling, soccer, swimming, and I just want to kudo all the parents for their time that they put into that, and our athletes for dedication. The kids that get involved in these sports and dedicate themselves, they're staying out of trouble. They're the ones that are going to make a difference in our communities, and just want to support their efforts. And the city of Soldotna has been putting out a message on the radio reminding people to be cautious with moose, that moose are extra aggressive, give them a little bit of a right-of-way, be vigilant, and not to feed them. There's been a lot of incidences through my neighborhood on Birch. I've been watching it on Woodland where there's aggressive moose that are hand-tamed. So that tells you people are feeding the moose. Just want to remind people to be cautious, be careful. If you know that there's an aggressive moose and you see people walking, remind them, because some of these moose are pinning people that are walking and they can't get around and access. And so just want to remind people to be cautious with the moose. And just kind of let people know that, Matt Brown and Operation Children's First have their first fundraiser this Saturday. I am not able to attend because I'm at a swim competition in Anchorage. I've donated an item to their auction and just want to encourage everybody to get tickets and support Matt Brown's Operation Children First. And if you're not familiar, Operation Children First provides school supplies, clothing, backpacks, Christmas, Thanksgiving dinners. Believe he's helped over 1,500 families in our local area. So it's a great cause. It'll help Matt be able to continue to help people. He is also, as a nonprofit, able to take, and I don't know much about the Hillcourt program, but I know he receives plenty of the employee match from Hillcorp. So just want to thank the Hillcorp employees that do look at Operation Children First and encourage everybody to go to his first event. That's all I have.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Basin.
Good meeting tonight. Good night.
Thank you. Councilmember Nexton.
Thank you. I've been kind of out of town for the last 2 weeks, but I can assure you that there's places without snow. They're out there.
Thank you. And seeing no other business before this body, we are adjourned. Saw moose tracks right out here on the sidewalk. See those moose, but all those stripes out there.
Goodbye.